Hey everyone, so I'm currently on replit.com and today we're going to be learning about Python while loops. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new replit, and for the name we'll just call it while loops. And while this is loading, Python has two primitive loop commands. One of them is the while loop, which we're going to be learning about today, and the other is the for loop, which we're going to be learning about in the next video actually. The while loop can execute a set of statements as long as a condition is true. So to give you an example, let's say I is equal to 1, and for while I is less than 6, print I and increment I by 1. What this code is going to do is it's going to print the numbers from 1 through 5 on separate lines. The reason why is because when we set I equal to 1 here on line 1, we're setting an initial value for our indexing variable, which is required for the while loop. And since I is less than 6, we're going to print I, which is 1, and then we're going to increment it by 1. So I is going to equal 2 now. And since when I is equal to 2, it's still less than 6, it's going to print 2 and then increment it again. So I is going to equal 3, and then so on until this condition here is false. So let's run the code. As you can see, we're going to get the numbers 1 through 5. And one thing to remember is to always increment I by some number. And this is very important because if you forget to increment I, if we run the code, we're just going to get a bunch of 1s forever. It's going to print on and on and on. And that's because if we don't increment I and we set I equal to 1, it's always going to be less than 6 because I is not going to change. So it's just going to keep printing 1s. So in order to prevent that, we're going to have to increment I by 1 or some other number. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to learn about Python while loops is the break statement. And with the break statement, we can stop the loop, the whole while loop, even if this condition here is true. So for example, if we add this and we run the code, we're only going to get numbers 1 through 3. And that's because when I is equal to 3, we're going to break from the while loop. And so we're just going to stop it completely. And it's not going to go on to the next iteration. It's going to stop all the subsequent iterations. So if, for example, we changed this to 5, then it would only, or 4, let's say, it's only going to print numbers from 1 through 4, because once I is equal to 4, it's going to break. And we see that here. So the next thing we're going to learn about Python while loops is the continue statement. And the continue statement is pretty similar to the break statement, except it's only going to stop the current iteration and continue on with the next. So it's not going to completely break from the while loop. Instead, it's going to continue on with the next ones, with the subsequent iterations. So for example, if we set I equal to 0 and we switch the orders of the code around, then we run, you're going to notice that we're going to get the numbers from 1 through 6, except we're missing the number 3. And that's because when I is equal to 3, we reach the continue statement. And what that's going to do is it's going to stop that iteration. So whatever's underneath that is not going to happen. It's not going to print I when I is equal to 3. And it's going to continue on to I equals 4, and then so on, until this condition is false. Okay? So the last thing that we're going to learn about Python while loops is the else statement. And what the else statement is going to allow us to do is once it reaches the end and the condition is no longer true, then it's going to go directly to the else block. So once the while loop finishes, it's going to go to the while block, the else block, and then print I is no longer less than 6. And so that's going to happen right after this condition is false. So let's run the code. You're going to see it's going to print 1 through 5, and then it's going to print I is no longer less than 6, because when I is no longer less than 6, it's going to go to the else here and then print this statement. And that's going to be it for Python while loops, and thank you for listening.